deal and check out XO. He's also ex-PayPal, ex-Nuvei. I know James now for over a year. And I invited him today to talk about what happened behind the scenes of the payment gateways. Myself, being in e-commerce for a long time, I had my fair share of trouble with payment gateways. And I wish I would have met James before to actually give me tips of how to avoid, money blocks and getting bans and reserves. And my business would have definitely suffered less if I met James before. So I decided to invite him to kind of shed some lights into best practices and also what happened behind the scenes. Hi, James.
Hey, Matteo. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and you're calling from Tokyo, right?
I'm on holiday at the moment, so we fly back tomorrow evening. But yeah, I've had a lovely 3 weeks out here, and this is good, getting me back into the spirit of business.
Yeah, live from Japan. Nice. So yeah, what you're gonna talk about us today? What you have for us?
Well, I think based on the conversations we'd had, I mean, a lot of it was seemingly about risk. So I thought we'd focus predominantly on risk. And I do get a lot of people asking me, how to hack the system, how to cheat the system in terms of risk. And there is no cheating here. I'm not going to be revealing secrets on how to commit mass fraud today. But I think we can all go through some of the obvious red flags, the obvious ones to us in the payment industry that people fall into. And I think part of that is because there are so many different forms of payment gateways out there, and a lot of them have different underwriting processes. Some of them are very quick, so it seems like you can get up and running super quick with people like Stripe and PayPal, but they're actually kind of just doing an express underwriting, giving you a limited account, and later on we're going to go into the more detail, and that's where these blocks come up. So I just put a few slides together we can run through, and then the last slide sort of focus on 10 areas of scrutiny, and I know you've run into some of these things as well, so we can then use some real world examples, have a good chat about it, and I invite any comments or anyone's got any questions about it, we can dive into it on the fly.
Yeah, sounds good.
Excellent. So first of all, I guess we should talk about what is a payment gateway, because there's lots of different terminology used. People say payment facilitators, payment service providers, PSPs, payment gateways. Essentially, they're payment companies. And when it's a gateway, they're really providing merchants with a merchant account, which then connects them to the payment network. And that payment network is going to be the acquiring banks, so the banks that are acquiring the funds on behalf of the merchant, the issuing banks, so that's the cardholders' banks, and the card scheme, so that's Visa, MasterCard network. So it's a big network, big game of pass the parcel in terms of the API calls that are sent around there in order to complete a payment. So if we look at let me just check that's working. Slide 1. Yay. So starting at the top, moving clockwise, typically how a payment works. If we're talking about a card payment, the cardholder submits their details, confirms the payment. That info gets sent on to the merchant's acquiring bank via the payment gateway. The acquirer receives and sends that to the appropriate card scheme. So if it's a Visa card that's being paid, that goes over to them for the checks. The scheme sends to the cardholder's issuing bank, who then authenticates and makes sure they've got enough money in the account, make sure it's not a stolen card. That then response is shared back to the acquirer, who shares it back to the merchant via the gateway, and all going well, we get a confirmed sale. So it's as simple as that, but it's obviously not simple because there are tons of checks that are going on throughout this. So it happens in the blink of an eye. It's pretty amazing that it can happen so quickly because there are tons of checks that are going on in this process. Fraud checks, making sure any activity that looks strange. If the acquiring bank is in a different country and it doesn't look like this transaction makes sense, buying ski equipment from Brazil to London, for example, might look strange to a bank, so they might put a soft decline or a hard decline on it, and that should therefore again be relayed back through this in terms of the messaging, and eventually get back to the merchant with either a sale or a reason why that sale can't go ahead. But most important is to remember that the payment gateway is taking all of the risk. So if something goes wrong, if you, Matteo, have sold £1 million worth of goods and then disappear off into the sunset, we're left holding the baby. So that's why it's so strict. That's why they're really underwriting you, because they're effectively underwriting you for a line of credit. It feels like it's your money, but things can go wrong if the goods haven't been received by the customer, and even after that, they could do a chargeback. So 12 months later, up to 12 months, a full calendar year, they can issue a chargeback. So if the product that you've sold, if it's electronics and it goes wrong, they could come back. So we're always looking to make sure that there's funds available to issue those refunds, or if it turns into a chargeback, which is basically a complaint to the bank, that we can go ahead and refund that customer. So that's pretty much how it works, and why risk is central to everything. Payments is risk, basically. So make risk your friend is my advice. Don't fight it. Just try and understand really what the process is all about, and factor it into your business practice, the products that you select. So underwriting, we get a lot of questions about this because it can be a long process, but the layers of risk that they're trying to consider is the industry risk. So every industry has an MCC code, a merchant category code. There are over 500 of them. And when you're being underwritten for a specific MCC. So your merchant account, if you're selling T-shirts, you're ready to sell T-shirts, not watches. And this is what often happens. People get underwritten. They think, okay, great, let's do some business. And then they go off and start selling other categories, which are not in their approved in their account. So this is where stops can happen. There's legal and regulatory risk. So different laws around the world, what's legal in one country might not be in another. There's regulations, health products, for example, gambling, certain licenses that you might need to have in place. There's financial crime, which is the big one, the obvious one that we all think about. Fraud, merchant fraud being the biggest threat to the payment company, by the way, not credit card fraud, as people may think. It's obviously a big one, credit card fraud, but a fake merchant selling stuff and then just disappearing, that's, kind of our worst nightmare in the payment industry. Sometimes it's deliberate fraud, sometimes it's accidental, sometimes we'll never know. So you remember the fire event that was all documented on Netflix. This is the kind of situation that we're trying to avoid, where people are brilliant at selling something, but they're absolutely not going to deliver it, and then we're left.
And that's why I think is sometimes merchants feel punished when they scale very quickly, because of that reason, right? So I saw them before. When I was in Shopify, we saw fraud stores, and we could recognize them because, for instance, one technique that they use is, let's say you have a very viral, famous product, that, I don't know, let's say costs, I remember seeing this, so it was one of those interchangeable weights. It was like $500 each dumbbell, right? And you can actually exchange the dumbbell. And this guy was selling it for $50, the same exact product. And when I saw it, I was like, there's no way, because just the weight of that item, it's more than $50. So what he was trying to do, he was getting for $50. People would just buy, and then that's it, and disappear. And this is why with PayPal, you have, even on Facebook as well, you can't scale ads. You have limits. You can start at $1,000, and then there's $5,000 at $25, and every time you have to ask, and they have to up the limits. So. Yeah,
spot on. Yeah, I mean, that's what fraud looks like, and they're very good at it. The genuine fraudsters. You've kind of got the deliberate fraudsters who will look very buttoned up. It'll be amazing. They're great, lovely looking website. They can spend an awful lot of money on it. So it's very hard to distinguish from, is it real or not? And then you've got the accidental fraudsters, people who just fall on hard times. They haven't got enough money to fulfill it. They're trying to use the network as their line of credit. So both are things that we're trying to avoid, and we'll go into a bit of detail on that. But you're absolutely spot on. There's these kind of products. If it looks too good to be true, that's where the element of common sense comes in. And this is why some categories like luxury watches are seen as such high risk in our industry. There's a lot of fakes. A Rolex watch worth 200K could be a fake. Some of the fakes are so good, they're hard to determine whether or not they are fake. So you might be a legitimate merchant, but your supplier might not be. So we need to check every layer of that supply chain as well to make sure everything's.
And that's where I guess the dropship model comes up, right? Because obviously,
Precisely.
If you don't manufacture your own items, you're using a third party, you're not in control of the quality. And if you don't have your own warehouse and you don't ship the products, you're not in control of your shipments. And so if
Exactly.
you are manufacturing a product from a third party and shipping from a third party, even though you are a reliable person, you are risky because you're not in control. Is that correct?
100%. And a good fraudster, they're going to send you, the first watch they send you is probably genuine, the one that you'll be checking out. So just like in kind of pyramid schemes, anything like that, they're generally, boiler rooms, they do issue real stock initially to lure you in, and then things may change. So this is an ongoing process, and risk is a kind of a living thing that we have to just keep an eye on constantly. That moves into the operational risk quite nicely, because the operational risk is just that, what might go wrong with your supply chain, your operation chain, your software, something that just crashes, that means you can't fulfill the order. And mostly we're looking at credit risk. What's the credit risk? What's the worthiness of the client? Are they likely to go under? So if we look at the, so I'm just trying to click through to the next one, a typical underwriting process, what it should look like. And if you look at sort of PayPal, Stripe, they'll do the express one. So you can get set up super quickly, which is great for a merchant. You want to be up and running as quickly as you can. But important to remember that they will be doing the rest of this check at some point when you hit a certain threshold. So if you are a big business already, or you're planning to do a big launch, you're planning to do thousands of transactions in your opening months, you're probably best to get a thorough process done anyway. But it starts with pre-screening. This can be done automatically, through the machine learning now. There's a lot of modern techniques that can speed this process up no end. Or it can be done by a salesperson at the payment service provider. So I used to do a lot of this, checking out the website up front. Are they real? Is the website good? Do I actually want to put my reputation on the line by submitting this underwriting request to the risk team? So there's a lot of pressure on the salespeople to make sure that everything's above board.
Yeah.
Identification and KYC. Mm-hmm. is again pretty easy to do. We just need some photo ID, make sure that you are real, make sure the business is registered and located in the UK, and then you start to move into the other stuff: merchant history checks, business operational analysis, on which we will go deep. Don't think they're just going to have a quick look at the website and say, oh, that looks good, because again, they could be on the hook for it, and there could be legal ramifications if you get it wrong. Web content analysis is key. So we look good. The optics really are important. So if you haven't got a customer service line on there, how's a customer going to complain? We know that's going to turn into chargebacks. Guaranteed. So if there's no phone number on there, it would raise my concern as well, because they're going to have to send an email. So then how responsive is that email? If it's going to take 3 days to respond, the customer again may go to their bank. So there's all these kind of things that we're looking into. And then the information security and compliance. So all of that completed could and should lead to a merchant account. Or if it's a startup, maybe they need more information. Maybe they need some business plan ideas. I know you're a serial entrepreneur, Matteo, and some of the stuff you've done, it's been really beneficial when we've been able to see how you plan to sell this. If you're predicting big numbers. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Dylan was asking, would a merchant that's been referred by an Ecom marketing agency tend to have less risk?
Well, it depends on what they're selling. There's no, there should be no bias on anything like that. And when people, the worst ones I ever had was when one of my bosses would come and say, "My friend's got a business, can you help them out?"
Yeah,
you start to shake as a risk.
It doesn't. I think, Dylan, what makes a difference, and this is true, is the volume that you are doing. That obviously I saw making a difference. If you are an enterprise client and you are processing a lot of volume, then they will consider your case. They'll take a second or third look, right? Would you confirm that, James? I think it's like volume,
it's when it becomes more, what the computer can say is yes, no, or refer it on, escalate. Yeah. So the risk isn't going to change no matter who's referred you. We're still going to look in detail at every criteria. In fact, it's probably worth us jumping into this next slide, because these 10 things is really what we're looking at in general. There's a lot more than this, but we're trying to break it down into high level ways. So the business category, what is that business category? T-shirts come in many shapes and sizes, literally. But it could be a $1 T-shirt. It could be a $10,000 $100 t-shirt. The risk profile of those is hugely different. So we're going to be looking at the products that are being sold, the industry fraud that we've seen within that business category in the past. All of that is going to be calculated as part of the score. So no matter who's referred you, who's vouching for you, but it can have a degree of influence. As you know, Matteo, I mean, I've worked with you before, and I've actually really spent some time with you to understand what it is you're doing. And if you've got a representative that understands how the risk works, we can not submit the application until we've taken advice from the risk team to say, actually, what does this product look like to you? And it might be they say, look, we love the business model, everything they're doing, but the terms and conditions look a bit shaky. Can you have a look at that? Can you maybe reduce the delivery time? Can you, all sorts of different feedback that we might come back to.
Or ingredients as well. Like when you go into supplement category, they look at not just like if it's a supplement or not, they actually look what ingredients do you have. And I had cases where they had to kind of take out some ingredients because those ingredients were associated with risk.
100%. So if it's creatine, there's all sorts of different things that could be, depending on the amounts that are in there. CBD, it has to be under a certain volume, 5%, I believe. But again, there's all sorts of different things that need to be checked. Anything that you're putting into your body in particular is going to go through extra scrutiny, even if it's water.
That's a category itself that is already a risk, like any nutraceutical or, and that's the nutraceutical realm is complex. It's really complex.
It really is. And if you're claiming to make people look younger or better, or you're making James look stronger, what happens if I don't look stronger after?
But this is also in advertising, right? So for instance, like if you go on Facebook and TikTok, they have very, very strict rules on claims. While if you go like native ads like Taboola and Outbrain, they still have those rules, but they will look into your data and your documents. If your documents check out, you're going to be able to do claims. While with Facebook, it's just like a no, like a category no, like you cannot do it. So they actually scan the landing pages, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we need to know that it's not falling into false advertising or anything that could lead to a chargeback. So number 10, where we're talking about
expectation, right? Expectation versus reality. That could be a chargeback. Yeah.
This is the best water in the world. Who's to say that? Whereas but you could say maybe George Clooney says this is the best water in the world, in which case you can get around it that way. Or I believe it, but it has to be contextual. So we're going to be looking at that and the claims that are being made. Would they stand up in court, basically? Mm-hmm. If somebody came back to you and said, look, I bought that cake and it wasn't the most delicious cake I've ever eaten, as they claimed, they're going to award them a chargeback. So they're going to win that. If your company's not around to issue that refund, or you haven't got enough money to issue that refund, the payment company's going to have to do it for you. So they're liable for it. So therefore, they will check it all out. So again, if you follow this as a kind of a code of conduct almost, and become more risk, it makes perfect sense to almost everything you do. And it might change, as you've done in the past, change the product slightly, which is then reduce the whole risk, reduce the cost of selling that, and probably improved your sales in the long term as well. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we've talked a lot about this, the psychology of language, this eagerness to get next day delivery. Do people really need next day delivery? But what they want is consistent delivery. So if you say 3 days, make sure it is 3 days. Don't say next day and then deliver in 3 days.
Managing expectation, I think, is one of the things I learned in e-commerce and customer service. It's if you say 10 days, that's it. I mean, if the customer makes a commitment and buys your product knowing this is 10 days and the red is 10 days and it arrives in 10 days, it's not going to be any problem. I think it's mostly managing expectation. You're right.
100%. Absolutely. That's you've hit the nail on the head. And in fact, exceeding expectations isn't always a great thing, because they may have arranged to be at home to collect the goods that particular day. So again, think that all through. The business model is something, number 2. Business model is something that we really look at, because it's different risk categories for that as well. Online is more risky than in store, because they're not there to type their PIN code in. The card holder's not present. Call centers higher risk still, because somebody might be taking that. They're using a virtual terminal. Social sales, again, so we need to understand what are the channels that you're selling through, so that we can then put the right risk category around that. And again, that might influence how you actually sell or where you put that point of sale. how it appears. Do you always direct them to a hosted checkout page, which is all fully endorsed by the payment company? That's going to de-risk it for them. If you're taking them off plan and sending them a link and something's different about that, that's going to carry a different risk category as well. So how you sell, where you sell is really important. The fulfillment time, we just touched on that. This is where you're going to get reserves. I'm sure you've had reserves on your accounts before. One of the big things that we do in the industry to try and understand, to predict what those reserves are going to look like, is we look at exposure. So that's the amount of products you have in flux at a given time. So if you're selling £1 million worth of products every week and it takes a week to deliver them, the exposure to us is £1 million. So you can expect reserves of at least £1 million over that period. That's going to be a minimum level for your reserves. There's other things that they might categorize in there as well. And that's just to make sure that, first of all, the products arrive. The money's still locked in the merchant account. We don't take the money. The money's locked in the merchant account until the customers receive the goods and they're happy with it, and then it's released. So you may see rolling reserves to try and keep this balance, to say we need at least 50K in the account at any given time, just to make sure we manage that. You may want to issue a bond. Some of my customers prefer that. They'd rather just put some money up front so they can keep using that income as operational expenditure.
I think James blocked for a second. Okay, Dylan. I think James is having connection problems, so I will reply to your question. So, do you work with e-commerce platform like Shopify, Ecommerce, like fraudulent merchants to go live on the web, asking to ask our partnership could support or reducing risk to the consumers? Okay, so I can actually give you my experience from working when I was working in Shopify, and we used to get tickets about stores that were possible fraudulent. So that usually comes from like a complaint, let's say that a customer has, like a customer that didn't receive the product. They used to come to Shopify and say, hey, I didn't receive my products. Usually support cannot do anything about it. Like they can't, we can't support them, obviously, because, we were support for the platform and not on the customer behalf. But this type of requests usually then what happens is they get flags and passed on to the risk team within Shopify. And I'm sure Ecommerce is the same. So the risk team within Shopify then would look at the store and start doing their own internal analysis, right? So the parameter that we used to look at was things like IP address. So if the IP address was different from the registration of like their, the address that the customer used, the user or the merchant used to register. So if we see like logging in from different IP address, that usually like a big risk factor. As well, things like if they're using a VPN as well, usually you can see as well the names are kind of strange, So when you start doing this check and then you check the store, what product are they selling? If Shopify think that the store is fraudulent, they blacklist it, right? So basically they take the store down. What happens then, the merchant gets an email and saying your store has been taken down because it's fraudulent, and then the merchants can basically call the support or can log in and chat with the risk team and see if they can reinstate the store. Hi James, glad you're back.
Hi, sorry about that. I thought I'd lost you, but it was obviously me that had abandoned.
Yeah, I know. It's like there was the question about do you work with e-commerce platform like Shopify e-commerce or fraudulent merchants to go live on the web? I talked about how Shopify deals with fraudulent stores, and it's not really the payment gateway; it's more like on the platform side.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we've lost the presentation somewhere. Let me see if I can reshare. Have you got it stored? See. Or otherwise I can share my screen and
you can share your screen, or you can press plus and upload the presentation again.
Let me just share my screen instead. That's probably going to be quicker.
Here we go.
Okay, so where were we? We were here. And let's do it from. So just add them all back up there. So yeah, I think we talked about the fulfillment time, the total volume, and the average sales value. That's going to be critical as well to understand. Again, the higher the volume, the higher the risk, essentially, and the higher the price of a ticket item as well. That carries higher risk. The regional coverage, where you sell, the fulfillment times, the currencies that you accept. Again, this all factors in. So share as much as you possibly can and get a pack together. So if you are planning to launch in another country, it's really important that your payment service provider is aware of that and that you're underwritten to serve that particular country as well. And then the rest of them, security and compliance is kind of, there's lots of different compliance that needs to be done. Everybody needs to be PCI compliant, whether that's just a self-assessment or a higher level. And then the industry standards that we talked about, if you're in health, for example, gambling, you need gambling licenses. So there's different standards and certifications that could be required. They'll look at the personal credit of the beneficial owners to make sure that there isn't any bad credit history there, and also really just to make sure that people are able to support themselves whilst running the business. But more importantly is probably the business health, the credit history of that particular business. So this is where they're going to look for bank statements. So have that all prepared and expect a little bit of scrutiny around that. It's nothing personal. It's just completely standard. They need to be aware that the business is in good health. But I think the most important thing from my point of view, certainly, is we're looking at refunds and chargebacks. And I know with Pop-Up, you've got some great data sources and you're building really good analytical tools, which will help merchants to really monitor those ratios. And if people don't understand the difference, a refund is something that's voluntarily given. A chargeback is something that's demanded through the bank. So up to 12 months after a sale, a customer can go to their bank and demand the money back for whatever reason. That then goes into a dispute process, typically takes 30 days. There are fees associated with chargebacks, and it's a dispute. So they may not get their money back. They may be in the wrong, but it's certainly something you want to avoid. And again, in my experience, anything over about 0.5% of chargebacks, you're starting to move into the danger zone where Visa and MasterCard are going to start monitoring you and trying to understand why those chargebacks are happening. Why are people phoning their bank? Why are they not contacting the merchant to get a refund?
Not a lot, huh? If you think about it, like 0.5 means that you have one chargeback out of 250 orders, right?
Exactly, it's not a lot at all, and that's not. Don't quote me on those numbers because I mean that's just a rule of thumb that I go by.
I remember.
But it's it's you can go to Visa and MasterCard and see what those numbers look like. They do a calculation on it basically. So but it is pretty low with refunds. It can be higher, but again, lots of refunds usually means there's a problem with the product. So again, there's going to be concern around that, and is there enough money to cover those refunds? Why are people asking for the refunds? So again, it's a kind of a concern for us in the payment industry, and it should be a concern for the merchant as well. So listening to the customer feedback, understanding what's going wrong with that product, why they're demanding a refund, and potentially dropping certain products. If it's one of many products that you sell and there's one that's really letting you down, I would certainly look at putting that on hold for the time being, talking to your suppliers to understand, what the quality issues are with that product and see if we can reduce it that way. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. So I think I don't know if you want to look at those ones in any more detail. I think you had a few examples that you run into.
Yeah, I mean, on the personal experience, I think I dealt with, if you open up the slides, I had issues through my e-commerce career through the years. On business category, so 1, 4, 10, 9, yeah, that's it. So when I was 1, I think because we were classified as dropshippers, even though, once we were dropshippers, the other time we were still dropshipper, but a completely different model. So one time we're actually, years ago, before Viceroy, we were shipping directly from China. So that was actually pure dropshipping from China. When we started Viceroy, we actually had stock on the ground in UK. It was a completely different model. So we it's not that we were receiving the order and shipping the orders directly from China. We actually buy stock, move the stock over, and then. But still, I was classified as a dropshipper. Then business sales, credit, and history. Yeah, that played into the factor when we scaled very, very quickly, and we had like probably 8 months of history with Stripe and PayPal, and that kind of they blocked the money because they didn't have enough history with us. Nothing we did wrong. I mean, there was no chargebacks, but the number 1 and number 9 played into the factor on our risk model. And then the other one as well was like the business structure as well, because the company was open in Estonia, and I'm resident in Ireland, so they saw this as a risk factor. Because obviously, if they say, if something happens to the company, there's no repercussion to you, so you're not liable for anything that can happen to the company. So in theory, I could just sell, declare bankruptcy, shut down the company, and no one is liable. And then obviously PayPal gets liable for all the money, right?
Yeah.
So that was my spirit. And chargeback was the big one. That was in 2017 when we scaled that product to $4 million in very, very short amount of time. And the supplier didn't ship most of the product, and we got hit with chargebacks to the point that I think we had, like you said, 0.25%. We had 500% chargeback rates.
Yeah, well, that's going to be a problem. I mean, really, I mean, again, people say different numbers, but yeah.
So what happened there? They blocked most of the money, and PayPal put the conditions was like 100% reserve for 6 months.
Yeah. 6
months, 100% reserve, meaning that all the money they were making from PayPal, we couldn't use them for 6 months. So we had to shut down PayPal because it was like, it's impossible, right? You can't run a business. You make money, you don't. Your cash flow is 6 months. You see them in the bank after 6 months.
No, exactly. I mean, they're trying to obviously mitigate the refunds and the potential of those chargebacks. Although people could do it up to 12
crazy.
months, it's unlikely. But yeah, again, it's very important that people are aware that these things can happen and staying on top of that and staying on top of the data. Issuing refunds if there is a problem and those goods aren't going to be shipped, then just issuing refunds immediately to everyone. That's what really needs to be done to avoid falling into that trap.
I remember this guy doing this. I remember a friend of mine that he was doing as soon as the customer was opening, like even a message or any like, oh, I didn't receive the product, his like, it was refunded straight away.
Yeah. Yeah, you see a lot of people doing that. Again, when refunds hit a certain amount, again, that could be a concern, but it's far better than it turning into a legal dispute. And there are fees, as you know, associated with those chargebacks as well. And it's really just the time of it all, the fact that you're going to have to go through this legal dispute, fill out a load of forms.
Fines as well. Not many people know about the fines. Yeah. They actually like the cops fines is the same thing. You get a fine.
Yeah.
I think around the time was like around $50 per chargeback. So let's say you have 100 chargebacks open, you get the fine for $5,000, right? We got, I think, was about $350,000 worth in fines, or just fines that we had to pay to market penalties. Yeah, and they're gonna take you to court because they have global presence, so there's no escape.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And again, it's to cover the costs, the fact that legal people have had to get involved and everything else. So there is it's not just charging money for, people don't want chargebacks in any way, shape or form in the payment industry. So again, it's keeping on top of that and thinking what could trigger a chargeback. And it's really them not being able to get in touch with the merchant is often what causes that. So make sure that you are accessible. Sometimes it's hard to stay on top of it. So again, using great tools. So with pop-up, for example, you're going to have good ability to get visibility of this stuff, and making sure that people are paying attention to those alerts, that if somebody has raised a refund request, that they're processed quickly, because a refund request turns into a chargeback pretty quickly. If you've bought some good, just to put yourself in their shoes, you've bought something, you've made a complaint, and 2 days later you still haven't heard back. What do? You typically you're going to phone the bank.
There's also another thing that not many people think about, and I learned the hard way of actually a lot of chargebacks open because oftentimes when you sign up on Stripe or PayPal or things like that, or payment gateway in general, you put your business details, and then the business details are used as a credit card denominator in the bank statements of the customer. Now, a lot of the times, if your business is called something, your store is probably, a lot of the times people name their business and the name of the store is different. So what happens is that people being charged by because they don't recognize the charge, because the name of the business is different on the store. So make sure that the denominator is set with the name of the store. So when the customer sees in the bank statement, they were like, oh yeah, I bought from, drfosters.com or whatever it is, and not from Viceroy Group. And this happened because they were looking at Viceroy Group and we had 7 different brands. And they were like, what's this Viceroy Group? And they were just opening a chargeback.
Yeah, the descriptors are really important. That happens all the time. So again, when you've got multiple products, it's trying to be as clear as you can be with the description that's going to show up on the bank statement. So, I've seen examples of that even with, major retailers. I remember McDonald's, I think it was years ago, used to be MKD 172 or something. I'm talking about 10 years ago, and I remember seeing some transactions there thinking, what the hell's that? So you can quickly fall foul of it. And again, it's out of mind then, especially if it's just a throwaway purchase that you've bought and it's 30 days later and you look at your bank statement and think, what was that? So this happens quite a lot. There's lots of different reasons why people might look at chargebacks. And I guess it's probably a good time to move into this slide, but some of the good practices to have, keeping a risk pack, making sure you're going to be asked for this information constantly. It doesn't end when you get underwritten. When you hit certain growth spurts, they're going to ask for it again. So making sure your documents are all there, your plans are updated, share changes when you can, be proactive and transparent, and build trust with that payment provider. I know it's difficult sometimes because sometimes you may have gone through that automated process and there may not be that human contact. But go out your way if you can to try and build that contact. That will go a long way when you've got somebody going into bat for you at that end and saying, look, Matteo, he knows a ton of influencers. This product's going to go boom one day. So, let's be prepared for that. I've had examples of people selling seasonal goods that, are clearly going to have spike time. So if it's garden furniture, for example, you're not going to sell much of that in the middle of winter, and then it suddenly booms in April, and that can set off red flags. So making sure that the processor is really aware of how that business is going to work, what's going to trigger a spike. Could be a marketing campaign. I think you did a marketing campaign, didn't you? And that, you all planned, you paid for, triggered a great response, you made a load of sales, and then that caused problems because the spike wasn't being expected by the payment service provider. So again, trying to be as open as you can be and making sure that information's to them.
Yeah,
predicting and planning. So go ahead.
No, I think communication and transparency, I think always to mitigate risk somehow, right? So yeah, you're right.
It's really important, and building those relationships, remembering that risk people are awesome people, and they deal with businesses all the time. So often they can give you some really, really good advice if you can get to that point. If you've got a conversation with somebody, or you've got someone like me who's representing you on a sales side and talking to the risk on your behalf and coming back and giving you some thoughts and feedback, and you've always been awesome at that. I remember, just making those changes because that just shows a huge willingness, and a fraudster wouldn't be doing that kind of stuff, So again, it's just showing the right willingness to learn. Being aware as you possibly can, selling ethically. So it's difficult. Again, sometimes we're just so passionate about our products, especially if it's something you've built yourself. So it's easy to sometimes get carried away and say, this is you see it all the time. These are the most comfortable shoes in the world. But clearly that's a reason for somebody to come back and do a dispute later on. Having clear terms of what happens if something goes wrong. Is there a guarantee in place? Trying to avoid overselling. And again, what we just talked about there, having clear descriptors is really important. So it's kind of sold as seen. Sometimes returns, you'll get a lot of returns because of size. It's an obvious one with fashion. The size, it was wrong, and then they've sent it back and they've decided, you know what, I don't even want to replace it now. So having some sizing technology in place is a good call, or at least having a picture of someone and saying, Matteo is the model, he's 6 foot tall, and whatever, and he's wearing a size M. That's going to reduce your returns dramatically. So some of the advice we'll give people isn't just about risk. It's actually going to help to drive conversion as well, and just making sure people are making good decisions when they're buying things, and then they're more likely to hold on to them when they arrive. So all of the stuff that you do, and I think that the community of Pop-Up and these sort of conversations are great because it's all about being customer centric. We want to be as proactive as we can with the customers. We want to listen to them. You want to know what they want. You want to know how to, if there's lots of complaints coming in about a particular product, you want to take that product off the shelves and figure out why. So, but most of all, you want to be reactive, because one of the things risk people are definitely going to be doing is looking at Trustpilot and social media. And if there are a number of complaints that haven't been responded to, that's a big red flag. So at the very least, respond to the customers where it's visible, because again, that's going to go a long way to saying, well, these companies, actually, there's somebody there. They've paid somebody to take care of customer services for them, and that's going to go a long way to the customers as well. And you've probably, like me, checked TripAdvisor before you check into a hotel, and if you can see that the hotel managers come back and commented about complaints, that kind of takes the edge off some of those long whinging complaints that you see on TripAdvisor.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, it happened to me that you checked the reviews, and they were like, "Oh, we saw some negative reviews coming in. What's going on?" It's like they do. But at the end of the day, I think they're trying to make your business better, right? And avoid you to take shortcuts. That's the end of the day. That's what it is.
It's a good way to think about it. And if you can be the kind of, tap into your inner risk person. So it's difficult for us entrepreneurs because we're all about, blue sky thinking. We want to take on the world and make everything great. And sometimes that positivity can get you into a bit of trouble. So you kind of want that risk officer on one shoulder and the CEO on the other, egging you on. And when you're taking advice from all your friends and everyone's saying, what do you think of this? Everyone thinks it's awesome. Let's do this. Always take a moment to kind of think about, what could possibly go wrong here. And if you are looking for products to sell and you haven't even started building your business yet, check out the risk profile, because there's a lot easier things to sell than very high risk products. So if you were going to launch a business, for example, tomorrow, and you didn't know what you were going to sell, and you decided, right, I'm going to sell Rolex watches. You couldn't have picked a harder and higher risk product to get approval for. So think about that as well. And if there are products that are slightly outside of your scope, I collect sneakers. So an obvious thing for me, I've always wanted to start a sneaker sales business. I come to Japan a lot. Why don't I buy sneakers here and sell them back in the UK? Because it's really hard, to be a reseller of used sneakers is extremely high risk. There's a lot of fakes out there that they use, so they're going to be potential returns. The size, they're big to ship in the first place, but also the size can be wrong, so lots of reasons why people might return them. So if I were to start an ecom business tomorrow, it probably wouldn't be sneakers, but that's not to say that that's not a great business model. If you love that and that's what you sell, be great at it, know your industry, know your supply chain, and go for it 100%. But don't just sort of dip in and out of things and take, it's that kind of market trader approach where you get a great deal on something, you buy a ton of it because you think, I can make some money off that. But then you find out that's putting you into a massively high risk category. Reserves come in place, your pricing goes up for the payments, and maybe you wish you hadn't gone down that route in the first place.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's a good advice of this. I get asked sometimes what kind of product should I sell, and the risk category to me is actually a good starting point, because the less risk is the product, the easier as well is to sell. So if you think about products that don't weigh a lot, no electronic, that's what I would say: no electronics, no sizing, small products. Especially no sizing, because it's just this, you avoid returns. And electronics, electronics, a lot of things can go wrong, especially Bluetooth stuff, right? Oh, my Bluetooth is not pairing, it's not working. And sometimes it's not the product that's fault, it's just the person that doesn't know how to do it, or things like that. And then, so it's true, yeah. So it's good advice.
Yeah, and then you've got the other things that, is there a resale market for those goods? That puts it into a big high risk category. So with electronics, iPads, for example, you could steal an iPad and you can sell it on the black market tomorrow for a similar value. So that again plays into it. Is there a reason for fraudsters to target that particular business? Jewelry, luxury goods, anything that could be faked, anything that your supplier might fake. Again, just make sure you really understand your supply chain. And if in doubt, try and reach out to your payment provider and say, look, what do you think? We're thinking of going down this route. What advice can you give us? Is it something that we need to get underwritten for? And if you're expecting a spike in goods because you sell Christmas trees and Christmas is coming, make sure they're aware that spike is on the way.
Cool. Thank you so much, James. And we already replied all the questions. So if there is any other question, I invite everyone to join our community. And James, I officially invite you to be one of our experts panel. We have a lot of experts in many different segments, but obviously on the payments, I think you'd be great. Payments risk, payment gateways. So I invite you to join our community. And for whoever watched and who didn't watch as well, and is watching this for the first time recorded, you can join our community and you can reach out to James. And last thing, James, you want to say what you are been focusing on, because you haven't spoken about Checkout XO at all.
Yeah, well, we focus on helping merchants with a lot of what we've discussed here, just trying to really optimize their conversion at checkout. So sometimes that is about risk and de-risking it and changing some of that, but sometimes it's about the psychology of the language that's used on there, the payment methods that they might want to use if they're working in different areas. So we have a big focus on Asia Pacific, for example, helping people to sell over here with the right payment methods. If you're not going to sell much in Japan if you haven't got PayPay, but people haven't even heard of PayPay in the UK a lot of the time. So we help with that kind of localization, conversion, but not anything to do with payments really. So if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out, and always happy to have a chat.
Cool. Thank you so much, James.
Pleasure. Thanks, Matteo. Take care.
Thanks. Okay, bye-bye.